18, I took all the money I had in the world, which was about $900, and I had no idea where Yugoslavia was, but I knew it was in Europe. And I bought a one-way ticket, TWA, from Los Angeles to London. And that was like $640. That was most of my money. And I got a passport. And I flew to London, and it was like, hey, where's Belgrade? But I'm exaggerating, but not by much. It took me almost 5 weeks to get to Belgrade. I ended up hitchhiking. I also learned something, I don't know what you call it, but in America they used to call it riding the rails, which is a way of stealing a ride on a train by climbing in the undercarriage. And you can rest and hold on like this, and most people wrap their belt around it. And you get pretty dirty, but you can go hundreds of miles that way. And there were Swedish and Italian and British hippies who, I had long hair then, and it was a different world, you know, 1969, 68, very different time. But I got to Belgrade, and it was very interesting because going behind the Iron Curtain in 1969 really meant something. It was like going from color to black and white, and it was like going from like 1969 to 1945, because after World War II, France and Italy and Spain and most of Europe and London started to rebuild, and but behind the Iron Curtain, you're talking about Hungary and Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia. These countries, they didn't have the money to rebuild, so it was very different. It really was wild. Plus, Tito was alive and running the country, so there was lots of hammer and sickles, and guys with guns and boots. It was different than LA. In LA I was a surfer, In Belgrade I was like, isn't he awfully young to be holding that machine gun? Anyway, I arrived there, and it turned out I got there before the movie. So I went to the address, I was told, in Belgrade, and it was an empty office. And I thought, now what do I do? There's no cell phones. And I was like, what? Gee, I had about $20 left. And I slept in the doorway. And the next day, an Englishman named Terry Landis, who was a British production manager, came to open the office. He said, who are you? I said, my name is John Landis, and I just came to work on the movie for Monday Martin. Oh, Monday? All right, come in. And actually, for about 3 weeks, I lived in the office. So I ended up becoming almost indispensable to the production. A huge MGM picture that was supposed to shoot for, I think, 54 days. And we were there 9 months. With Clint Eastwood, Telly Savalas, Donald Sutherland, Don Rickles, Harry Dean Stanton, and the Yugoslav army. And they played the Germans, they played the French, they played GIs, And this was, have you ever seen Kelly's Heroes? A very strange movie. And it was probably the best time of my life, because I became indispensable to the unit. All the Europeans hated each other, and we had Austrian and German special effects. A legendary guy named Carly Baumgartner, who everyone called Carly Boom Boom. And he used to wear, he was a Tiger tank commander in the war, and he used to wear a German helmet, Army World War II helmet, and smoke cigarettes that were like 2 inches of ash. And he'd be doing this while he'd make a benzene bomb, with a thing like this. And I would think, is that safe? Yeah. And we had a Italian, the wonderful Emilio Lari, great photographer, he was a stills guy. How this happened, I don't know. But the director of photography was the brilliant and legendary Gabriel Figueroa from Mexico, who shot the Buñuel films and shot all of John Ford and Henry Hathaway and John Huston movies in Mexico. He never worked in the States because he was a communist. You know, they called him a limousine communist, because he also owned Churubusco Studios. But he was a wonderful man, Gabby Figueroa, and the only director of photography was shooting film. He never used a meter. He would hold up his hand and look at the back of his hand, like that, and then call out the exposure. It was wild. Anyway, it was a very international crew. British and American stunts, British grips and electric, Yugoslav, everything else. And they really didn't get along. We had an American first assistant director. Director was Brian Hutton, very nice guy. The American first assistant, the first day of shooting, he didn't get out of the car. He came to the set and he sat in the car and wept. He had a complete breakdown. And he did that for about 4 days. And they finally sent him home. So for like a month, I was the first assistant director. I mean, that's how fucked up. It's a huge MGM movie. It was the best time of my life because I had all the joy of actually making movies and none of the responsibility. You know, I was doing what they wanted me to do and it was fabulous. And after that, 9 months, I had met a guy on Kelly Zero's named Jim O'Rourke. James Cornelius Patrick O'Rourke, who was also American. He was a football player, very handsome, very tall, black Irish. He had like black curly hair and blue eyes, and he looked like a Michelangelo sculpture. And whenever he needed money, he'd go seduce some woman. I'm serious, he's the only gigolo I actually saw work. But Jim said they're making a lot of movies in Spain. And it was true, because this is 69, 70, when Franco, like Mussolini, like all good fascists, understood the power of cinema. You know, I mean, Mussolini started Cinecittà and the Venice Film Festival. I mean, they got it, you know, and they used it for bad ends, like a lot of people still do. But there was a lot of production in Spain. Interestingly enough, mostly Italian, but lots of British, French, German, American, just so many movies. I was in Almeria at a time where 17 films were shooting. And Almeria is a shithole. It's in the middle of the desert. Now it's kind of built up, you know, but then it was nothing. It was a bull ring and a whorehouse, and there was nothing there. And they made Sergio Leone. I worked for him on 2 movies. I worked on Once Upon a Time in the West. I worked for 3 months as a stunt person because I went with Jim to Madrid. We met some people. We had letters from Brian Hutton and from Clint Eastwood, stuff like that. And I wanted to be an assistant, a PA, just to be on a set, you know. But we're standing there, Jim and I, and this English guy says, "You think you could do stunts?" And I went, "Does it involve surfing? I could do that." You know? And then he said, "Do you do horse falls?" And Jim went, "Absolutely, born on a horse." And I'm doing this, you know. But 2 days later, I'm on a horse, dressed as a hussar, along with 200 other schmucks that were riding into the valley of death, and they're shooting at an explosion. And I learned how to fall off a horse, and I became quite good at it, actually. In any case, so I worked on a lot of movies as a stunt guy, and then because I was American and
spoke English.
I worked as a dialogue coach. I worked for directors who I didn't know who they were. I just knew they were Italian and using fake American names. And then later I learned they were like famous. So really? You know? But I worked on so many movies, westerns, monster movies, mostly westerns at that time. Some famous, mostly not, but Franco Nero, when he sees me, you know, still goes, Landis! Because I was in this terrible movie, Django.
Don't tell that, Quentin, that's a terrible movie.
No, sometimes being a terrible movie is a good thing.
Okay, so we agree on that. Django is a great
Wonderful movie.